All right, hello. Good morning, everyone. Thanks a lot for coming to my talk. Since we are in a cinema, I thought we'll do something a bit different. Today, I'm going to be talking about why we fail at modularizing our app, like our Android app. In reality, the title should be why we fail at modularizing Sky Sports, but I had some problems with that title, but now you know, so it doesn't matter anymore. Before I begin, what I'm going to be talking about today is my own experience working at Sky for the last 3 years. There are going to be things that might apply to your cases, but there might be other things that won't apply because there's a lot of different ways of modularizing, and there's different approaches that you can take. So just take what is going to be good for you and just ignore the things that you think that don't make any sense. Also, like the title suggests, this is going to be a very open and honest retrospective. So I'm going to be showing some really good code right there that we're all going to enjoy. So let's start. My name is Marcos. That's my Twitter handle there. I'm going to be posting the slides after the talk. Like I said, I used to work at Sky. I was in the Sky Sports and Sky News team for 2.5 years, and the last few months I was in the My Sky app team. But now I work at DuckDuckGo, which you might know is like a privacy search engine. I literally started a week ago. But this is not really about DuckDuckGo, this is about Sky, and I wanted to begin with this quote. And like, this quote doesn't mean that a lot of people lack common sense. What it really means is that common sense is based on people's experiences and their understanding. So what I think is common sense for me might not be common sense for you. So like I said before, just take everything that I said with a pinch of salt and don't take it for granted. So let's talk about the Sky Sports app a little bit. This is how it looks like. This is the UK app. So we have this. We have different territories. That's the UK. We also have Germany, Italy, Spain, and a few more like Canada, United States, Australia are for some reason that no one really understands. We also have Nigeria. And we don't really have just one app. What we have is multiple apps. And you can see that each of these apps has a slightly different designs. Some of the features are similar, but are not really the same. And it's a bit of a crazy world to live in, to be honest. So how does this whole thing work? And the underwhelming answer is Flavours. In case if you don't know what Flavours are or how they work, I'll give you the gist. So usually you have your app module. Within your app module, you have your source package. And within the source package, you have your main package where you just write all your code. With Flavours, we add a new package per flavor. And this is not too great. This is great if you have a white label app. The only thing that you really change are assets and images and so on and so forth. It doesn't scale very well, and we'll see this. So if I just zoom in a little bit and I get rid of Italy, the way this works is if I create a new feature in the main package, then it's available in UK and Germany. If I write a feature and I put that in the UK package, then it's obviously not available in Germany. So if you have a product owner that comes and says, hey, I want to change something in this feature 1 because I want to use something different in UK. And you go, you make your changes there, and everything is great in the UK. But because we have multiple teams and no one really knows where the features were being used, and it's all in the same code base and it's in the same module, then someone just all of a sudden just broke Germany. And this actually happened, and this is real. So this is something back from a couple of years ago. And it's something that I fixed. It was just color. And the word, again, should tell you that this wasn't really the first time that this thing happened. But what's actually quite funny is that not even a week later, we had the same bug regress. And you might be asking, like, Marcos, why don't you write tests? Why are you so bad? And we'll come to that later, because it's also quite interesting. So with Flavours, you have a lot of problems. You have long build times, because every time you change something, it builds every single flavor. You try to change one thing, and you can break many others. It's very painful to work with, especially if you're a tester, and obviously it doesn't scale. And these were our reasons to move towards a modularized code base. You might have different ones. Probably the first one, you still have that, and that's probably going to be the main reason. So once you have this problem, you need to do something about this. And probably the first thing that you're going to do is you're going to try and talk to your team and say, hey, we need to change something here. We need to change the approach, because this just doesn't really work. And it turns out that convincing people is actually pretty hard. The good thing is that your teammates, they're suffering, and they know what you're talking about, so convincing them is actually pretty easy. The difficulty comes when you have to convince the people out of your team. And these are the people that are going to pay for modularizing. And this is going to happen if you want to modularize, if you want to rewrite your app, if you want to refactor. That's a problem that always happens. And usually we don't really think about that. We just think about ourselves. We just say, this is going to be easier for us. It's the way that we should be doing things. But higher up in the chain, there is someone that has to spend money. And you already have an app that works, an app that is generating a revenue. So they're not going to be too keen on you spending that money in rewriting the app or redoing the app. They probably want to add new features. So that's not easy. It took me probably 4 or 5 months to actually get the money to have a new team to start working on modularization. And it didn't come for free. It comes with this thing that all these upper management people have, which is they have always a vision. And this is what they want you to do with their money. It's not what you really want to do, but it's what you have to sell them that you're going to be doing somehow. And they also came with this idea of a showcase app, which I'll explain later. So what was this vision? This vision that they had was, well, we know that we're going to have to create new apps for new territories, so we just want to be able to create a new app very quickly. And what they thought that we could do is just create a website where you can just type the name of the app, check some features, press a button, and then magically just generate a new app. And I mean, of course, we didn't do that. But to demonstrate that we could get somewhere closer to that, we built 3 simple first modules. We created a plugin for Android Studio, and we demonstrate to them that with some clicks here and there, we could create a new app in around 2 minutes. And they liked that idea, and then is when we actually got the money to work on this. So you create a new app, you select one feature, it could be like an article list, you select like a carousel video on top of that, and so on and so forth. And this also was a very nice exercise, because we had to ask ourselves, what is a module? And because we knew that they wanted to reuse features, the answer was actually pretty simple for us. A module is just a feature. And it's not a feature module as in the Android world, it's just a feature of the app. And then also, everyone needs core, because you need a place to put all the stuff that you don't know what to do with it. So we ended up with this kind of like architecture. So let's focus on feature modules. And we also had to answer the question, what is a feature? And for us, a feature is just a black box. It's a black box that has inputs and it has outputs. And in our case, because depending on the country, we might want to modify some of the behaviors, it also had a set of listeners. And if we zoom out a little bit, the way this works is you have the app, and the app is the one that knows everything about your module. So the app is the one that sends the inputs, gets the outputs, which could be an activity, could be a fragment, and then implements the listeners. And the problem is, what is a feature? Because now we know what a module is, but we're not really sure what is a feature. And you might be thinking, well, defining a feature is actually quite simple, but it's not. If we take the article list feature, for instance, so that's just a list of articles, we know that when the user clicks on an article, we want to take them to the actual article. So we know that in this feature, we're going to have an article list activity, but what are we going to do with the other part? Like, are we going to put like a web view or any other like native article reader in that module? We could just create a new article reader module, and then our app implements on article click, which then will take you, the user, to the article reader. And at this point, this is quite simple, but it's not always the case. So I'm going to tell you the story of our very first module. We started with something like this. This was our app like 3 years ago or so. It's just separated in feature packages, which works quite well. And we had this package called streaming, because you are able to stream different TV channels from our app. And we had a hard deadline. We had to release a new app for a new country, but legally, we couldn't have this package inside. So it sounded like a pretty simple and pretty easy decision to just take this module out and modularize it, so then we don't have this problem anymore. But with the streaming module, it also came the live TV channel list. So you go to the channel list, you select one of the channels, and then that takes you to the streaming. And this was tightly coupled at this point. So we had to decide, do we keep them together or do we separate them? And unfortunately, we kept them together for a lot of reasons. And that was a very, very bad choice that until 4 months ago, we were still regretting. So this is not the case anymore, but we've been dragging this bad decision for around 2 years. So this was an extremely complicated feature to work with. It was something that was developed a while ago, and no one really understood what the whole thing was doing. It was tightly coupled with the live TV feature, and there was a lot of things going on in both places that didn't really make a lot of sense for us, so we just kept them together because it was easier, because we had a hard deadline. So it was also mainly done by one person, which is something that you should never do. And it was just like a very, very bad first example, because here we are trying to create our first module, and we're just rushing it. We have a hard deadline. We don't really know what we're doing. So maybe instead of starting with something like this, you should start with the easiest module. And that's what I did. So after this streaming fiasco and then just refactoring everything again, because it was just a mess, I decided to start with the easiest module. And there is nothing easier than the splash screen. But the splash screen is so easy, so simple. It doesn't have anything. It's just a splash screen, so it makes no sense of doing this. It has nothing. You can't really say, hey, I just created this splash screen module. Please follow all the nice patterns that I've just done here, because there are none. So I did this, and then it was never used. So maybe you should start with the most valuable. What is the feature that's going to add more value to you and to your team and to the whole company, really? If you try to go to a head of product and you say, hey, I want to modularize the splash screen, they're going to be like, why? What's the point? It doesn't do anything. But if you go and you say, I want to modularize the article list, because it's very difficult to work with. Every time we create a new app, it's just a mess. It has a lot of bugs. And that's a very simple and easy thing to sell. And of course, integrate that module as soon as possible. Don't be afraid of integrating your modules as soon as you finish, because the worst thing that you can have is some module that's not used. This was our bathroom like a year ago when we started, when we finished our renovation, and this is how it looked like before. So you're going to go through hell before it looks nice. And all the hackiness and all the weird stuff that you're going to have to do to integrate your first module, it has to happen in the app. Because what you don't really want to do is compromise your modules. Your module should be the standard to follow. So you don't really want to think about how can you create your module that's going to be easier for you to integrate in the app. You have to create your modules. You have to think about them in completely isolation. And this brings me to a really nice topic that people like to talk about usually, which is dependency injection. So in the case of our streaming module, for instance, it wasn't just like a player and the live TV. You also need a user as well. So the architecture that we kind of had at that point is we have a streaming module, we have a core module, app implements core, streaming implements core, because everyone should implement core, and then app implements streaming as well. And then you need the user on streaming. And that user actually lives in the app, is where we created first, because you have other features that also need user. So somehow, streaming also depends on app. And then you have like a cyclic dependency, which we know it's bad. So what you really need to do is you need to inject that user in streaming somehow. And we're using Dagger before. Is anyone here familiar with Dagger? All right, not too bad. So we had a very simple approach here. We had a normal component, and then each feature package had a subcomponent, and that worked very, very well. So the question is, was this thing still useful? And this also brings me to the question if you should be using Dagger versus Coin. And the actual answer is that it doesn't really matter what you use. You should use whatever you're comfortable with. And for me, personally, I think you should be using something that you actually want to understand. If you don't want to understand how Dagger works, don't use it. If you don't want to understand how Coin works, don't use it. Because we don't do TDD, we don't do BDD, we really do SOD. We actually go to Stack Overflow, looking for an answer, we copy-paste code, we put it in a place that we don't know if it's the right place, it works, but maybe you're introducing a new memory leak because you don't understand how that thing works. And this is what happened to us. Who did this streaming module didn't really understood how Dagger works. And we ended up with something quite nice. So I have a very nice examples here. So here we have a provides method, and we're using the singleton annotation, so it's a scope. But of course, we didn't trust that this was actually going to create a single instance for this scope. So we actually had to do our own atomic reference and things like that to create a singleton on top of a singleton. Very useful. Here we have an activity, and we're injecting a utility class. But again, we don't really trust Dagger that it's going to initialize this twice, so we just check it if it's not null before. Didn't make any sense. And if you're wondering what streaming module main is, this is quite interesting. This is an interface, and then this interface has a module helper, and then module helper is another interface, and it does some things, and you need a core component, and it's just crazy, and it didn't make any sense. And I'll save you the pain to go through how this works, because I don't even remember anymore. So all because who did this didn't understand how Dagger worked, and it just wanted to keep using subcomponents, because A is what we have, is what we've been copy-pasting, so let's keep using it. So we did subcomponents. And instead, what we have is something a bit different. So the problem with subcomponents is that, in this case, you have your app, and the app has the streaming subcomponent there, which is in another module. So that creates a dependency from the app to the streaming module, which makes sense. But if we now go to the activity in the streaming module, you can see that also needs an app component, which is defined above, so it needs a dependency to the app. And again, creating a cyclic dependency, which doesn't really work. So did subcomponents, and instead we have a different approach, which is just having a component that depends on another component. There's no subcomponents anymore. So For this to work, we have different interfaces that are responsible to create these components. In the application is where we implement them and where we create all the code, which is quite simple. You just create a component and make sure they always return the same one. And this allows us to go to the UK-specific application, extend from the Sky Sports global application, and because we only need the streaming component there, we just implement that there. So by extending from the Sky Sports application, we also have access to the provide core component because we're using the context, and the context is implementing that. So we now have access to that. We can use it, and we can also get the user from the app component as well. And to simplify this a little bit more, in the places where you do the injection, we have a helper which gets a component, a context, sorry. And the helper, the only thing that does is just checks that the context actually implements that interface and then just returns the component. So it's more simple and easier than what we had before. So basically, understand what you do and share the knowledge. Which brings me to using KISS. So using the KISS principle, which is keep it simple, stupid. Because I know a lot of smart people that come up with crazy ideas, crazy solutions that actually work, but no one understands. So if you really think that you are too smart to fail, because, hey, you know all the different patterns and you know how to create like crazy things and write code in one line that does a lot of things, I'm sorry, but if the whole team that you work with don't really understand that, you're failing. And I work with a lot of people like this, and it's a bit of a nightmare. So I'll give you some examples. This is something that I actually wrote. This was when Dagger introduced into map in 2.3, I think, like 3 years ago or 2 years and a half ago. And I thought it was nice. I thought it was cool because I'm using something new. It just uses this into map annotation. And the only thing that's doing is just injecting a bunch of factories into a map. And then we just inject the map. And we just get the factories in an adapter, I think it was. And that's fine. And it doesn't look too bad. But arguably, you could do the same thing with this. If you've never seen the into map annotation or you don't really know that API, this is probably more understandable. Here we just put in everything in the map and we're returning the map. That's it. And this is not a very bad case, but we had something worse. I'm really fond on this one because it took me a while. Our app uses a config.json file. It's a 14 JSON file. I think it's like 14 lines of code. It's not too bad. And it just loads some very basic configuration. It's not even difficult. And this was our implementation back 2 years ago for the config class. So to map that JSON file into an actual object. So we have a config class. And the config class has a map with sections. So key is a string, and the value is a config section. So let's see what a config section is. It's an interface. To do this, we also needed a deserializer. And you can see this main config deserializer has a bunch of deserializers in a map. So you have this config section deserializer, which, again, is another interface that does some things. And if you wanted to add, let's say, like a force upgrade section into the JSON file, you had to do something like this. You create a deserializer that implements the config section deserializer. You need this force upgrade class that implements the config section. And if at this point you don't think this is crazy, it's because you wrote this code. So one day, I just changed this, and this is the actual commit message. And I was so happy that I tweeted about this. Just look at the deletions. To parse a JSON file into an object, almost 3,000 deletions. We had, I think, 25 classes just to parse a JSON into a map. So don't overcomplicate things, because it makes no sense. And maybe this means not even using a core module. Like, do you really need a core module? I mean, you probably do, but let's think about this for a second, right? So in the case of the user, streaming needs a user, but we know that other modules also need a user. What do you do with this? I mean, the normal answer is, well, we just put that in core, because every single module is going to depend on core, it's going to implement core, so let's put it there. But why my about module has access to that user? Why my about module can execute methods from that user? That doesn't look like a very good design. So what do you do with this? What about the other libraries that you have there? What if you have, I don't know, some security stuff? Now you're making that thing available to everyone, and you're just blotting up core. So of course, you just create a new module, and then you just put the user class there, and that's it. So now you have an extra module with just one class. And then when you come to another class, then you do the same, and you end up with 100 modules, and everything's slow again, and nothing makes sense anymore. So maybe instead of doing these things, what you can do is you can write your own implementation of user in streaming. And you can call it streaming user. Because streaming user is just an implementation of user. And then the app is the responsible to fulfill that dependency. And this works very well if you start thinking of treating each module as a different library. And if you think about that, and you actually think about, let's open source those libraries, those modules, this works even better. Because now you're not thinking about, what do I do with the user that has 3 attributes that I don't really need? Where do I put it? You're just thinking about your module, which is what you should do. Forget about the app. You're writing a feature, focus on that feature, and just work on that. Or maybe not. Because again, it depends on your use case. This works fine in our case because we want to share features. Maybe your approach to modularization is not by feature. Maybe you want to do something like clean architecture, which is something completely different, and this might not apply in that case. And testing is obviously quite important. Like I said before that I was going to talk a little bit about testing, and I was going to talk about the Showcase app. So this is one of the biggest failures that we had there. One of the ideas was to have one single app, we call it the Showcase app, which will contain every single feature module, and it will showcase all the different configurations and different possibilities that you could have with that module, with that feature. And all the testing should be there as well, because why not? It's just simple. So think about 3 libraries, 3 random libraries. Now, try to create a new app using those 3 libraries, and try to implement every single thing that you can do with those libraries and test it. This didn't work. And that's why we had problems like the one that we showed at the beginning, where you just change one color in one place and it breaks in another. It was because the whole thing wasn't tested properly. It was based on this concept of the Showcase app, which was a bit crazy, really. But we work on this. We try to make it work, and we wasted a lot of time. So this is time that we're not taking back. And that's usually a problem, because there's people spending money on this. So what we did instead, we just ditched this Showcase app, not useful. And we started creating sample apps. So every feature module that we have also comes with a sample app, which is quite nice, because it lets you test the whole feature in isolation. And also, when you work with, let's say, your first module, you're not worrying about how you're going to integrate that feature in your app, because you're integrating that in a sample app. So it works very well, and it isolates you from the whole app world. And this is how it looks like. And it's just great. It's great for testers as well. So if there is any manual testing, they can just go open the sample app and just test everything. And we know that that's going to work fine in all our apps. And another issue that we had was resource conflict. And this is something that you might have experienced when you're working with a third-party library that is using a resource name that's quite common. So let's see an example. So let's say that we have our app, we have a core module, and we have a streaming module. And in the streaming module, we have a string called test. So if we execute this code, then the app is going to show my test, because that's the only string that we have there. If we now create a new string in core with the same name, what's going to happen here is that we execute the whole thing, and it's going to take the string in core. And the only reason why it's doing that is because it's the library, it's the module that we defined before, we defined first in our app. But if we now go and switch core with streaming and execute this thing again, now it's going back to my test. And of course, if you have a string in your app that overrides everything, and then what you show is what you have in your app. And this could be very, very confusing, especially if you're dealing with colors and you call them the same. If you have a color and you call that toolbar color, and you have a toolbar color in 3 different modules, and each module has a different toolbar color, like we have. Each port in our app has a different color. So you change one color, you break another one. It's all coming back to the first example that I saw. And the solution is quite simple. You just prefix that. So in this case, you could prefix streaming underscore test or core underscore test or something like that. But it's quite easy to forget to do that. So what you can do is that you can create a linked rule. And the way to do that is quite easy. In your Gradle file, under the Android section here, you can just add a resource prefix and add the actual prefix that you want to use. So now, every time that you build something, you're going to get a lint error telling you that, hey, this string or this resource wasn't prefixed. And that is very helpful as well. And to end up with, this is also it's something quite useful once you have a lot of modules, because it's quite difficult to focus on a single module that you're working on. If you have, I don't know, 20 or 30, it's not very easy. So something that you can do is you can create a scope in Studio. So if you go to Preferences, under Appearance and Behavior, you have this Scopes section. And there you can use a regular expression to specify the files that you want under that scope. So once you create that, you can also share that as well. And in your menu, in the project menu in Android Studio, you can just see there that now we have a new article list scope. And once you go to that one, it reduces the whole project view to the files that you define on that scope. So just to quickly recap, the 3 things I think are most important really about this is, in our case, for us, the app was what was holding everything together. Because it's very easy to start thinking about a module, and you start seeing how that module or how that feature is tightly coupled with another 3 features. If you think about, I don't know, like an options menu. In an options menu, you might have a logout, you might have a login, you might have, I don't know, like help. So do you really want to have a module which is not really 1 feature, it's like 3 features or 4 features? Do you want to make this module responsible for a lot of things? Because in the case of the article, if you click on an article, it has to take you somewhere else. It doesn't have to be an article, it could be video. And the only module that knows about all the other ones is your app. So your app is the one that should be responsible to say, when the user clicks on an article and the article is type video, then I want to use this other module. If you try to put that logic in the actual article list module, is when you're going to start having problems, and it's when you're going to start overcomplicating things. So treat your feature modules as libraries. That's going to make the whole thing easier, and just give them 1 responsibility if you can. And And of course, just simplify. Like everything should be as simple as possible, but not simpler. People usually tend to veer towards more complexity things, and they work, but people don't understand that. I've been in a few meetings where someone was explaining, I came up with this pattern. So you have a proxy. The proxy talks to an adapter. The adapter talks to a repository. The repository does this thing, and then you come back with this thing. And everyone in the room was like, yes, whatever, do that. I don't care. If it works, it's fine. But then that person leaves the company, and now it's your responsibility. So try to not overcomplicate things for the sake of it. There's always an easier solution. There's always a simpler solution. And you should veer towards that rather than to a complex one. And that was everything. There's like a few resources there. There is a repo where I have like an example with Dagger and modularization, because it's something that's quite hard to find. Few articles about modularization as well. And then if you're interested in the slides, they're there as well. Thank you.